Welcome everyone to our October 2024 meeting of the Christian Fiction Fans. Today we're talking about The Sowing Season by Katie Powner. And we have Katie with us today, so I'm really excited to have her. Let me tell you a little background about her to begin with. So Katie grew up on a dairy farm in the Pacific Northwest. She spent her formative years climbing trees, talking to cows, and perming her hair. I was on the perming the hair deal too, not talk to cows, but um, now she lives in Montana where cows still outnumber people. She's a happy wifey and mom to the third power, which is biological, adoptive, and foster, which is really cool. She writes contemporary fiction about redemption, relationships, and finding the dirt road home. She's been writing for as long as she can remember. She's been blessed to publish 4 books with Bethany House. She has a 5th coming out in August 2025. And she has a women's fiction novel releasing with Kregel Publications in spring of 2026. She's also won several awards, and we're going to talk about that, ask her about that a little later. The Sella Award, a Christie Award, and a final in the Carroll Award. So welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. Thank you for coming and being here. And why don't you start by just telling us a little? Well, first I wanted to ask, where in the Pacific Northwest did you grow up?
Our farm was in Savannah, and that's a really tiny town. So a better like landmark would be Arlington, which is north of Seattle.
So in Washington?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, very
So it
fun.
was pretty all the way west, almost to the coast, in between Seattle and Bellingham.
Okay, very cool. So, will you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an author? You said that you feel like you've been writing for as long as you can remember. Did you always want to be an author?
Yeah, basically. I don't really remember any times where I had other dreams, there would it like being a ballerina or, an astronaut or a nurse or something. I always just wanted to be a writer. What that would look like changed. Like for a time I was really into journalism and I was doing some articles for the local paper, that kind of thing. But it always involved writing one way or another. Like I spent a few years doing a lot of songwriting.
Hmm,
But again, it was always a writing of some kind, and that was
yeah.
all that I ever have really been drawn to. So since I was little, I was writing stories, keeping the notebooks. And my grandma, Julie, was really a big part of that because she was a storyteller herself. And so she was really into um, telling stories. We would go back and forth telling stories. And she was really into reading books, making sure like that's what she would get. The grandkids would be books. Make sure
Hmm.
you're reading books. And so she had definitely a big influence, I think, on me in that regard. So then, like I said, I spent quite a few years doing other types of writing, like not novels, but
Yeah.
some newspaper work, some songwriting. So it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I started doing the actual novel type writing, which is a
Hmm.
lot different type of writing
Yeah.
than for a newspaper or for songwriting. Both of those are very short form.
Hmm.
An article in a newspaper, you have a certain amount of inches, that you can
Yeah.
fill. And then for songwriting, you have like, you have 2 verses and a chorus or whatever, maybe a bridge to tell a whole story, right?
Sure.
That's See, that's how many lines you have
No.
to tell a story. And so um going to novel writing was a very different type of thing because now you're looking at you need like 80,000 words,
Yeah.
around 350 pages now. So it's a very different type of storytelling. Um, and I started doing it one day sort of just because I had a scene in my head that I just really wanted to write down. And then after I wrote it down, I added more and more. And then all of a sudden, I had written my first novel. And I use quotation marks for that because it was, I mean, it technically was a novel and it was technically about 80,000 words, but it was kind of a mess. I mean, it was my first try.
Yeah.
I didn't really at the time know a whole lot about novel writing. So it was kind of a mess, but doing it kind of, I caught the bug, I would say. Getting
Yeah.
that finished was sort of like, I can do this, like then I immediately started like another one. Because I knew that one was probably not ever gonna see the light of day.
Hmm.
So I immediately started another one and I was hooked. And I ended up writing 4 books before getting a contract. All
Wow.
4 of those books went through the process of, I would write it, I would submit it to like contests, maybe send it to some agents, some publishers to see what would happen. They would all get rejected multiple times. I would start a new one. So that happened like 4 times. And then on my 5th book that I wrote was the sowing season. And
Mm.
that one also got rejected a bunch of times, but it only takes one yes, is what they say in the
Right.
business. So it got a few no's and then got the one yes from Bethany House. And so then that became my first book to be published, which was actually my 5th book that
You've
I wrote.
written. Yeah. So where are those other 4 books? Are they buried in the files, never to come out, or do you think that you
Well,
will revisit them?
number 4 is the women's fiction book that's coming out with Kriegel in 2026, actually. And so, I mean, I wrote that like at least 8 years ago,
Hmm.
and it's been floating around for a long time. It went out on submission originally and got turned down by everybody that you can think of. I set it aside. I wrote a bunch more books. And then like a year or two ago, I kind of brought it back out and revised it
Mm-hmm.
because it's a story about a foster mom. And so it's
Hmm.
really important to me. It's an
Yeah.
important story that I wasn't really ready to give up on.
Yeah.
So I reworked it a little bit, um, added kind of since I had more experience by then with
Sure.
writing, I was able to kind of add some layers that I
Hmm.
felt were missing. Now that I kind of like, I just hopefully was better at my craft by that point. So then we sent it back out on submission to make the rounds again. And it got rejected again, almost all the way around. But again, it only takes that one yes. And so it did get a
Yeah.
yes that time. So I am really happy about that because, like I said, I wasn't ready to give up on that story because I think it's really important. The other 3 out of those 4, I think will probably just never see the light of day. Yeah, I think they probably weren't. A couple of them were actually in a different genre. Like at the time, I didn't even know what genre I wanted to write in. I
Hmm.
didn't know what my own voice was supposed to be like. I didn't know what I wanted out of writing, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
So those books were definitely a learning experience. They were not a waste, but I don't think they'll ever come out of the drawer.
Yeah. We had Erin Bartles on here a couple months ago, and she has a manuscript like that. But she said she ended up taking pieces of it out and putting it into some future novels. So she felt like, there was still some things she could use out of there, even if maybe the novel as a whole wasn't going to work or, didn't get any bites. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And there is one of the 3 does have kind of the just main idea and premise of it. I think I could still use. I would
mhm,
probably start all the way from scratch again, but
yeah,
the premise itself feels like a good one. So
yeah.
so then it's still, it still has a little bit of life in it.
Sure. That's really cool. So you talked a little bit about you wrote 4 books before the sewing season got published. That's your 5th book written? Is that?
Yep.
And then now you have with the sewing season, that was your first one, and you have 3 others that have been published.
Yep, with Bethany House.
Yeah. And
Yep.
this whole writing journey started 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was about 10 years ago that I had finished that first one that
Yeah.
was a mess, but that I was like, I want to see what happens. I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't say I was at that point like, okay, I'm gonna, make this my career or anything like
Hmm.
that. It was more like because I had a young family.
Hmm.
We were homeschooling. we were in full-time ministry, it didn't necessarily feel like a good time to
Yeah.
be pursuing that career or
Yeah.
whatever. So it was very much baby steps, like, well, let's take this one next step and see what happens, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, my husband and I would pray about that and be like, you know, if that step, if there's another open door, if it's blessed, we could feel comfortable taking then the next step, you know, but
Yeah.
every time, every step of the way we wanted to be okay with it if that was it, if that was the
Right.
last, you know, I wanted to be okay with it if it was not going to be something I can do until maybe
Mm-hmm.
my kids were out of the house or something
Right.
like that. And I was fine with that. That was kind of my plan to begin with, because who starts their writing career when, you know, they have, like, at the time we had three little kids, and then we were had just started fostering, and like I said, the homeschooling and the ministry, like,
It's a
see
lot.
it, you know, from a worldly perspective, I would say that was the worst possible time
It doesn't make
to
sense. Yeah.
to start my
Yeah.
writing career, to pursue that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think, why I prayed about it so much. Like, are we sure about this? You know,
Yeah.
are we really sure this is a good idea? But every time we would take one little baby step in faith, and the door would be opened again, and it would be
Mm-hmm.
blessed. So we would take one more,
Yeah.
and that's still the approach that we're taking. Um, and I've just been just blown away
Mm-hmm.
by the doors that God has opened, and we're just going to keep walking through them.
Yes. And God never seems to work in logical ways, does he? Like
Yeah, because it
things that
really, yeah, like I said, it
make
makes no
sense.
sense. It makes no sense.
Right. Yes. Oh, that's awesome. But in 10 years, you've written 8 novels then. So that's amazing.
Yeah, actually more than that. Yeah, because I have the four that I've published, the four that came before that, and then the one that's coming out in
Oh,
August,
uh-huh.
and then there's another one, another two that I've written kind of in between some of these other ones that
Yeah.
are still looking for a home.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
that's
that puts us at 11.
okay. That's more than a novel a year. That's
Yeah,
remarkable.
so
That's
it's
really,
kind of crazy. It's definitely not what I expected. Yeah.
right. Especially with a young family and homeschooling and everything else on your plate. That's remarkable. Tell us a little bit about your awards and what the process was with that, what books won awards.
So So some, so there's several different kinds of award organizations. And so kind of the biggest ones, or the most familiar ones in Christian fiction, is the Stella Award, the Carol Award, and the Christie Award. Those are sort of the
Hmm.
main ones. There's lots of them, and they're all great. You know, those are sort of the more maybe most familiar ones. And so for a lot of those, a lot of the times the author themselves submits to their work. It's not the publisher, it's usually the author that pays the fee,
Uh-huh.
sends it in, enters the contest. Um, so that's kind of interesting, because then, you know, you're paying money to send it in, you're paying to mail it, you know, or whatever, using your copies. And so you do have to have a certain amount of confidence that
Yeah.
it's going to be worth it, you know. Um, and so you usually then want to be really selective with what you enter, because you can't enter everything, because you have to pay every
Right.
time. So I try to be really careful about which books would make the most sense for which contest, to give it the best possible chance, you
Hmm.
know, of successful. Um, so then let's see, it was my third book, which is Where the Blue Sky Begins. So that's this one,
Hmm.
that I got. This one was a Sela Award finalist, but then it was put up for a Christie Award and won book the General Fiction Award
That's
for
fantastic.
last year. So that was really cool. So then this year, my newest book is this one, The Wind Blows in Sleeping Grass. So I sent this one to the Sela, and it won the General Fiction for Sela Award. And then now is a finalist for Christie, so it's in the running. But the winner of that is not announced until, I think, November 14th is the day that they have the Christie
Okay.
Award. Um, so there's four, because of a tie. Usually there's three, but because of a tie, there's four books in the general fiction category. So this
Hmm.
one and three others that then are in the running. And so we won't know that until
Yeah.
um month. But
Um, Gabrielle Meyer is one of her books on there. No, she would have been on
Not in
historical
the
fiction.
general
Yeah.
category. She's
I
in a
feel like
different
somebody,
category.
one of the other authors we had on, I feel like was um, Amanda.
Amanda Cox is
Yes.
in the, yeah,
Yes.
so she's in the general fiction category with me. Her book, He Should Have Pulled the Bees, which is
Yes.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that was
that's
our
one of the
September
four.
read. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that's also in the running.
Yeah, I knew there was another familiar author on there. I was trying to remember who. Cool. Well, we wish you luck, and
Thank
we're
you.
all
Yeah.
going to have to read this book now next.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah, it's really fun, and it's fun to be a finalist, and it's fun to win awards. But mostly, I mean, it's just, you look at the other books in the category, for example, and you're just like, those are such great books. I mean, they all deserve to win, so you really do feel like just being there is
for
an
sure.
accomplishment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Elda, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. And it's probably a silly question, but the covers of those that you pulled up are so gorgeous. The blue and the green. Oh my goodness, they're so captivating. Do you get to choose that, or does your publishing company go, no, this is what we want? Or how does that work?
That's a great question. And a lot of people ask that because, I mean, and I didn't know either beforehand. Like, it's always like, how does this happen? And I did used to assume that the author had a hand in the cover, which is really not the case. Typically, if you're traditionally published by a traditional publisher such as Bethany House, you you have the opportunity to give your opinion, such as, I turn in my book and I say, these are the kinds of things I would like to see on the cover. These are the kinds of things I would not like to see on it. Here are some pictures maybe of the setting, to give inspiration. Maybe here's some pictures of, like, for example, in Where the Blue Sky Begins, the blue truck plays a big part. So I would send a picture of the truck from the story as ideas to say, these are the kinds of things that, you know, I want to see. And then that's basically where my role ends. Then they take all that and they have their designers and they come up with designs and they vote on the different designs and stuff. And I don't have any part in that. Um, there's a committee, they vote on it, they choose then the winner basically of that vote. Um, and I say vote, it's not quite like that, but basically they pick the winner and then they send it to me and say, this is what we have, what we came up with. Do you have any thoughts? And at that point, it's not final, because little changes can be made. To go back to this one, the original cover had the truck was flipped this way, going this way, which made the guy right here the passenger. Well, in the story, that made no sense because he was
Mm,
always the driver, because part of the story was that he was driving this lady who was dying, driving her around. So I was able to say, well, we got to flip this truck because he needs to be driving it. And they were happy to do that. They moved it so that, and so things like that, they're really great working with you on things like that. Um, but as far as the actual design, that's something that they kind of just say, this is this is what you get. Yeah. Which is really not a problem because the covers are all amazing and I always am just like, I love it so much. So yeah.
that's awesome, but nice that they at least run it past you before
Yeah.
it goes to
Well, because sometimes
publication.
they might not know,
Yeah,
a detail like that, they might not know.
right.
And so, we can kind of collaborate that way.
Yeah, that's very cool. So you grew up on a farm, and this one that we read is a farm-related story. Are all your stories farm-related?
Um, No, they're all definitely kind of small town, kind of rural settings,
Yeah.
mostly in Montana, because that's where I live now. Not necessarily farms, but typically a farming community, or there might
Hmm.
be characters who are or who were ranchers maybe or something like that. So they're all tied to farming,
Yeah,
and tied to rural life, I would say. Yeah.
right. And the sewing season, what kind of inspired you? Where did you get the idea for this story?
I mean, I grew up on a family farm that was a dairy. And so I lived there, till I graduated and moved away. And it the sewing season kind of came about after, so my dad had passed away when I was young, and then my grandpa passed away, and then my one uncle who had been working on the farm took off, so there was only one uncle left working the farm. And obviously, if you know anything about dairy farming, it's pretty much impossible to keep a farm running on your own. It's such a big job and it never ends. It's a very demanding job. The cows don't go on vacation,
Yeah,
they don't have weekends, and so it was eventually just became to where he couldn't continue. And so he had to sell the farm. Um, and he was, I'm not sure thinking back, but I guess somewhere around 60 when that happened.
hmm,
Um, and then had to basically start a new life at that point. I mean,
yeah,
that had been his whole life because if you're a dairy farmer, that is your whole life. That's the only option. So seeing that kind of happen and how he had to sort of figure out, what do I do now? Like,
yeah,
now that this life is just over and now I have to like start a new life. And I just thought that was such an interesting thought, such an interesting idea. So that's where the sewing season was born, was with that.
yeah. But I think it's also a nice universal theme too, because we all have chapters in our lives where something ends and we have to start a new thing that maybe we didn't expect, or, we may have poured ourselves into one thing and now things are different. And so you have to figure out, who am I now that the thing
Yeah,
I thought I was is over and I have to move on. So it was
yeah, that's such a great point.
yeah,
Yeah. Especially if you kind of had that, if that was part of your identity
right.
and and then it's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in today's world, people don't normally stay in their careers for 30 years at the same job, so there's this reinvention that happens over and over again as people lose jobs or, would have to go a different direction and things like that. So as also, oh, Elda has another question. Yes, Elda.
Thank you. Oh, you had mentioned that it was your uncle, right? That he turned 60 and then he had to, okay. So because you brought up his age, I need to ask you, when you wrote this, were you writing it from the perspective of a young girl? Because when we're a child or a youngster, maybe even a teenager, we look at 60 and we're like, oh my goodness, that's so old, you know? But then when we're that age, we're like, wait a minute. You know what I mean? So I was curious because that was brought up a lot in the book, about him being old, and yeah, trying to figure out what he was going to do with his life. So I was just curious about that.
I mean, I think I've always spent a lot of time around older people. Because when I was a teenager, like the first thing that I did when I got my driver's license was I went and got a volunteer application at the nursing home because I always felt most comfortable around older people. I spent a lot of time there. And so I guess, I don't know if this answers your question, but it just seemed really natural to me, I guess, to have those two really different ages interacting because to me, like that kind of thing was life changing. Interacting with older people and like learning from them and being influenced by them. And then I also now see how that's really missing a lot of times in younger people's lives. There's just not a lot of that intersecting that happens. So like when my kids were homeschooled, for example, I always made sure and brought them to like the older like widows and stuff from our church. I would take them there and they would read to her or things like that to give them that experience of like how interacting with a different, generation and things like that. And so I think all of that sort of, I think, informed um, that kind of age thing, if that answers your question.
And it makes for such a beautiful story. I mean, it was
Yes.
just so, it was so heartwarming. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I felt it really surprising as I was reading the beginning of the book and seeing the ages of the two characters, and you know they're going to cross, but you're just going, how in the
How are they gonna,
world are
yeah.
they going to get together? Because these two paths should never cross. And so it was a really interesting twist to put that together that they were helping each other and coming from such opposite perspectives. Okay, I have something fun for everybody. Katie on her website has a little quiz, a farming quiz. And so this is the first time I've ever tried this, but I turned it into a quiz on here. And we're gonna try it and we're gonna see how it goes. Can you see it up there? Okay. So I think you can just vote on your answer, click on it. I don't know because I probably can't click because I'm in charge of it. So, of the 2.02 million farms in America, what percentage are considered family farms? 42, 96, 88, or 34? If you want to try and click on that and vote.
I think you have to choose an answer for all of them before you submit it.
Oh, okay.
Is what it looks like.
Can you guys scroll it down on your own?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good.
So do you want us to go through the whole thing
Yeah,
on our
so I
own and
guess, yeah,
then
go through the whole thing. I guess I can read them to you. What are the top three farm products in America? Cattle, calves, corn, and soybeans, corn, wheat, and potatoes, potatoes, soybeans, and barley, soybeans, cattle, calves, and wheat. Choose one of those. And then the third one, farmers must spend a lot of money to produce agricultural goods. Out of every dollar they spend, what is the average amount of return? 35 cents, 47 cents, 8 cents, or 15 cents? Number 4, how many pounds of strawberries can 1 acre of fertile land produce? 100,000 pounds, 50,000 pounds, 75,000 pounds, or 35,000 pounds? Number 5, a high producing dairy cow can yield about 4.8 pounds of butter per day. How many pounds of cheese can it produce in one day? 3.2 pounds, 15 pounds, 8.7 pounds, or 10.5 pounds? What percentage of food produced by American farms is never eaten? 60%, 15%, 30%, or 40%? Number 7, women make up what percentage of farm operators? 48%, 36%, 29%, or 21%? Number 8, how many people on average does one farm feed annually? 166 people, 250 people, 89 people, 115 people. Number 9, which category comprises the greatest percentage of the roughly 2 million farms in the country? Small family farms, large family farms, very large family farms, or corporate farms? Number 10, U.S. dairy farms produce roughly how many gallons of milk per year? 1 billion, 11 billion, 21 billion, or 31 billion? Number 11, in what year was the first home delivery of milk recorded in America? 1785, 1762, 1845, or 1821? And the last one, National Farmers Day is celebrated every year on what day? January 10th, April 17th, October 12th, or August 2nd? All right, has everybody had a chance to record all the answers that they desire? All right, I'm going to end the poll and let's see what it does. Okay, so this, but does it tell us what the right answer is? I had to put in the right answer, so oh, good, Pam is here. Pam, we're just doing a family farm trivia quiz. All right, I had to put in the right answers, so I thought it would tell us right on here. So maybe, Katie, you can help us.
I was trying to remember the answers because I made that quiz like 5 years ago.
Oh
So
no!
I was trying to remember. I think I remember most of them, but
Yeah, I thought I had printed it out, but now I don't know where the answers are, what I did with them. So we're gonna have to guess. Um,
I know where my packet is. Let me grab it.
okay. Okay. Wait, maybe
Yeah, I
can you
keep a
guys
copy of that quiz in this bag for this very
just for
reason
this
because
reason?
yes.
Can you
So
guys see it now that it shows what you answered? No. Okay, let me try this. Now, can you see it? Oh, and now it has the correct answer. Okay.
oh,
I
nice.
just had to push one more button.
Perfect.
We're all learning here. Okay, so the correct answer is 96% are considered family farms. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Top 3 farm products in America. The correct answer, cattle calves, corn, and soybeans. Yay! Good job. Farmers spend a lot of money to produce. Out of every dollar, the correct answer is 15 cents. Holy cow. That's the average amount of return.
And
That's,
that's why subsidies are so important for farmers.
yeah,
Um, Hear about subsidies from the government and stuff, which you don't want to necessarily um, have everyone reliant on the government.
right.
But as you can see, without subsidies, the farmers could not farm. So
Yeah, yeah, that's crazy. How many pounds of strawberries? The correct answer was 50,000 pounds in 1 acre. That's a lot. I was trying to think. I know I've gone strawberry picking with my kids when they were little, and I was like, how many strawberries could that possibly be? And
uh,
it's such a short growing season, too.
yeah, that's true. An acre, I think an acre is bigger than you think usually.
Mm-hmm.
So it does actually, there would be quite a bit of strawberries on there.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose that's true. All right. How many pounds of cheese? The correct answer is 10.5. Okay. I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed it was closer to the butter amount. And are you guys seeing the correct answers too? Okay, good. What percentage of food is never eaten? The correct answer is 40%. Okay. I would have guessed 60% too, probably. Women make up what percentage of farm operators? The correct answer is 36%. But Katie, you had another fact about this one.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to make sure and point out that if you look at it as farm owners,
Uh-huh.
it's actually about 50-50.
Okay.
I thought was really interesting. So farm operators themselves, as in people regularly working, 36% are women. But if you actually look at farm ownership in America, it's about 50-50, which is pretty cool.
Okay. Neat. And do you think that's because it's like co-owned by a husband-wife team, so you see more women like
I
on the
think a
team
lot of
or
times that's probably it.
yeah,
Yeah, the farms and
yeah,
stuff.
cool. How many people on average does one farm feed annually? The correct answer is 166 people. All right. Which category comprises the greatest percentage of the roughly 2 million farms in the country? Small family farms. And I would have guessed that because if they're small, there's more of them, right? So,
Right, right. Yeah. So if you look at corporate farms, they would make up the greatest percentage of volume,
right.
like volume produced. But as far as the number,
The
what
number of
percentage out of that 2
farms.
million is almost entirely small family farms.
Yeah. U.S. dairy farms produce roughly how many gallons of milk per year? 21 billion. That's just mind-boggling.
So much milk.
Yeah, a lot of milk. In what year was the first home delivery of milk recorded in America? 1785. Okay, do you know any facts about this? Because that's so fascinating to me as I was thinking about this. Like,
I remember that I'm trying to remember there was a state, I feel like it was maybe Vermont that that where that first one happened. And and just in the early days of the colonies and everything. And then
mm-hmm.
from there, then they were doing that all the way up until the 60s, and in certain places they were doing that up until then. So
Yeah. Honestly, where I've lived, I've been here for about 20 years, and when I first moved here, I knew some people who were getting home delivery of milk still. So
yeah,
I
well,
don't
and it's coming back now. I think there
probably.
some places, especially places that do raw milk and things like that,
Hmm.
are starting to bring back home delivery, which I think is fantastic. And the
Because
reusable glass and things like
yeah,
that, which I like, yeah.
because now everybody wants everything home delivered. That's
Well,
why.
that is true. Yeah, that is true.
National Farmers Day is celebrated every year. Did I get that? Okay. On what day? And it's October 12th. I was gonna guess that because harvest is over. That's the end of their
Right,
season.
because it's the end of harvest. Yep, that's why they chose it.
But I remember this one also had a fun fact about it.
This question,
Yes.
I don't remember.
Isn't it your birthday is one of these answers?
Oh, yeah, my August 2nd is my birthday, so like that's why I put it in as one of the options.
Awesome. Very good. All right. That was fun. Let me make this go away now. Okay. Back to Katie and the sewing season. Um, so you've got these two main characters, Garrett, 60 years old, and Ray, who's a teenage girl, who are just so very different, and you beautifully put them together. Um, Often there is a piece of an author in their characters. Do you see a piece of you in either of these characters?
Well, I was definitely the overachiever in high school,
Hmm.
that Ray is or was. Um, I didn't have the anxiety that she associated with that, but I was definitely felt the pressure like to do well. I loved school actually and got really good grades. I was valedictorian, all that stuff. So that definitely resonated with me as far as Ray goes. And then also, like I said, the um, spending time with like someone from a different generation, that was obviously, like I said earlier, something that I
Hmm.
did a lot when I was in high school. And so I I really liked putting them together because I had that experience
Yeah,
so much. And so it was kind of fun for me to like share that.
right. Well, in a way, I think Garrett is very much that high achiever too. Like he's been a hard worker, very driven to, do all the work and get all the things done, just like Ray is. They're just in different venues, shall we say, in a little
Right.
different
Yeah.
way.
He
So,
definitely understands pressure too, you know?
yeah, yeah. And I thought that was such an interesting theme to think about. Like, we sometimes feel like, um, we're indispensable. We have to do these things, and sometimes we put it upon ourselves. And obviously, in a dairy farm, like you said, the cows don't have weekends, they don't go on vacations, so there are very real emergencies. But as you went through that story and saw how little by little over his lifetime it had taken him away from his family, and how often do we do that in our own lives that we think, well, they need me and this job, or it could be volunteer work or whatever, this needs me. So it's going to take me away. But if you aren't careful, in the end, you've lost those relationships that you thought you were doing it for to begin with. And I just thought that was such a good message that is much needed. We all need
Yeah.
a reminder.
That's really well put. Yeah. I think that that's a great reminder
Yeah.
for all.
Elda.
You had mentioned earlier that you and your husband prayed about whether or not to continue, which that really impressed me because I don't know, I always think of men as like, oh, books, that's her thing. Or do you know what I mean? So that was really cool that he was involved with that. Well, I was curious now, when Deb was asking you about like a piece of you in the book, is there like a piece of your husband, or does your husband give you ideas when you're writing? And he's like, honey, why don't you write about this? Or not? I'm just curious.
That's a great question. In this book specifically, I wouldn't say so. I mean, Garrett and my husband are as opposite as you could imagine. But I definitely have pieces of my husband in some of the men in other stories. You'll especially see it when my foster care book comes out in 2026. Um, the husband of that woman, Laura, who's the foster mom, definitely has a lot of pieces of my husband in it. And as far as you mentioned ideas, so he, this is so funny because he thinks he has a lot of good ideas. And so he he knows it's kind of just funny and he'll throw stuff out that's like he knows is ridiculous. But I actually really appreciate it because when he does that, a lot of times it'll jog something that I can use. A lot of times what he's giving me is not something that I could really do, but it'll give me an idea or make me ask a question that does end up giving me something that I can use. And so actually when I'm stuck, like when I have writer's block or something, he's actually the person I go to, and he'll start just throwing stuff out and saying crazy stuff and asking crazy questions, and I'm like, I never thought of that. And then next thing you know, I'm unstuck, and then he feels like he's like that he likes that because then he feels like he played a part in it and that he contributed. So
Yeah. Does he read all your books before they go to publication?
he does not read them before. He gets the first copy.
Okay.
When I get my first copy, it goes straight to him.
Uh-huh.
And he then that's when he reads it.
Yeah. But it sounds like you've talked some things through with him, so he probably already has a clue about the
Yeah,
storyline
he
and
usually knows pretty much. Yeah, I mean, he knows the whole story
yeah.
pretty much.
But that's nice to have someone with fresh eyes, though, too, look at that point because you've gone through so many editors and you've read it a cajillion times that it all
Yeah,
starts to blur.
it
So,
starts to sound like nonsense in my head when you read
uh-huh.
it for like the 12th time and you're like, that does that sentence even make sense? Like it doesn't. Like in my mind, it doesn't. It sounds like gibberish.
Yeah, yeah. Oh. So tell us a little bit about your writing process. What is that like? I mean, if you've written 11 books in 10 years, you must be like really consistent, setting aside time, especially with your family and everything else. So How do you fit this into your life?
Um, I mean, it definitely changes with the seasons, from year to year. I mean, the seasons as far as like my season of life, but also the literal seasons like in the year.
Hmm.
Because for example, summer versus winter is going to look way different because I'm not spending a lot of time on my computer in the summer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're outside, the kids are home from school because they go to school now. A couple years ago, they started going to school. They were homeschooled before, and so it really just depends. But like wintertime in Montana, you spend, you're not doing a lot. You're stuck in the house a lot. You're not getting out very much. There's a lot of long days at home. So the majority of my work gets done kind of in those winter months. Um, and then I save summertime for kind of more of maybe editing or like brainstorming, doing online stuff like making graphics or newsletter stuff that you got to do
Hmm.
online, that kind of side of it. So as far as consistency, I don't know. I don't know. I think the consistent part is just that I'm always making a plan for what am I going to do next. So like you have to have a lot of planning because like I talked about all this other stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Um, so you're not going to just have time to write a book. You have to really plan to squeeze it in. It's not going to just happen. So a lot of planning, a lot of goal setting. Like by the end of this month, I want to have this many words written.
Hmm.
I don't want to do that for every day. Like I have to have this many every day. I mean, because
Yeah.
that doesn't work because day to day, who knows what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Especially like right now, we have a 9-month-old foster baby. Some days you know, he
Yeah.
doesn't let me work at all. You just
Right.
don't know day to day. So I try to make it more like month to month. And
Hmm.
that makes it feel attainable to me. Like, okay, by the end of this month, I want to get to 20,000 words.
Yeah.
Rather than today I have to write 5,000. Well, then if you don't do it, then the
Yeah.
next day you already feel behind,
Sure.
and that catches up, it snowballs. And so I don't really like putting that much pressure on myself. So I try to make the goals really broad and
Yeah.
attainable.
Hmm. Yeah. I like that. And do you have a time of day that you usually, are you one of those that gets up super early before the kids or stays up late, or you just fit it in when it fits?
I mean, mainly it's like nap time,
Uh-huh.
basically. If I know you kind of have an idea when nap time's going to be. So I try to get everything done before that so that when he goes down for a nap, I'm like, this is it. I sit
Yeah.
down, this is my 1 hour. Because you can't be frittering around, folding laundry and stuff during that time. I can do that anytime. I can do
Yes.
that in the evening. The kids can do that when they get home. Like, I can't be doing that during that time. I have that 1 hour and I have to make the most of it. And that's the time when and I really pray during those times too. Like, okay, Lord, here's my one little bit, you
Yeah.
know, and just do with it what you will, because I don't,
Yeah.
from a purely human standpoint, um, it's impossible,
Right. It's
but
a
nothing is
little
impossible.
a loaves and fishes. Like I have this to
Yeah,
offer, now you have to multiply it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. Did you face any challenges when you were writing the sewing season, and how did you overcome them and plow through?
I mean, there's always challenges of, like I just talked about, the time, the
Hmm.
planning. That's always a challenge. With the sewing season specifically, there was definitely a challenge of there was so much real history in my life regarding the farm, the farmer, the uncle.
Hmm.
Uh, so I had to really think through that and be careful. Like I didn't want to, you know, go too far with telling someone else's story,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that it was not overlapping too much, or
Hmm.
stepping, for lack of a better phrase, maybe stepping on his toes, because
Yeah.
that's his own story to tell.
Right.
Like I didn't try to tell his story.
Yeah.
Um, so I had to just really be careful to keep the two stories separate.
Hmm. And did your uncle read this book?
I no, no, I don't think so. Not that I know of, but I think it would probably be maybe kind of hard for him to read. So
Yeah.
I think that's maybe for the best.
How about any of your extended farming family? Have they read it?
Um, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are there any authors or books that have influenced your writing style, your career, or like that you would recommend to us? Because we're always looking for more good authors and books.
Well, there's a book called Summer of Light by Dale Kramer, and this is an old
Mm,
book.
I have read
It's a
that one.
Yeah, it's a Bethany House book
Hmm.
from years ago, and I can't remember how I stumbled across it, but this would have been at the very beginning of when I first kind of started writing novels. I read it, and it honestly changed my life because it was so different from what I thought Christian fiction was.
Hmm.
Because up until that point, I kind of had this idea of what Christian fiction was, or maybe a better way to put it would be what I thought Christian fiction had to be.
Yeah.
And that book just opened my eyes to a whole another kind of story that you could
Hmm.
tell, a very different voice than
Yeah.
any of the books that I had read before. Um, and that voice spoke to me, and I thought, well, maybe there is a place for me and for my voice
Yeah.
in Christian fiction, because before that, I thought I might have to write for the general market because I
Hmm.
just didn't know. Because what I thought Christian fiction was, I was like, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not what I do.
Hmm.
Um, so now, of course, I know of so much more diversity in Christian fiction, but at
Yeah.
the time I didn't. And so that book sort of opened my eyes to that and showed me that like maybe there was a place for me.
Yeah, and it's been probably at least 100 books ago that I read that. But as I recall, it has a male main character.
Yeah,
And
because that was the other thing was
yeah,
that because there's not a lot of that in
right.
Christian,
Like yours.
unless I mean there's a romance, but that's not the same thing.
Right.
That's different.
Yeah.
And so that was another reason that it stood out to me.
And the other thing I really appreciated about that one was it had humor like yours does that just tickled me at different points, things like in this book about him in the dressing room, him with his rivalry with the buying the rooster and clipping the dog's toenails, and just all the hijinks and stuff that just made me laugh. And I love that because I just think humor is so important to balance out the hard things in life.
Yeah. And I love that you said that because I do strive to make people laugh in every book because like you said, you have to laugh. I mean, even the most serious and depressing story has to have humor in it, because that's life.
Yeah,
That's how we survive.
yeah, I agree 100%. Well, before we let you go, why don't you tell us where we can find you and connect with you further?
I mean, if you go to my website, katiepowner.com, then you'll be able to go link to everything else from there. So it might be the easiest thing because then from
Hmm.
there you can go to my Facebook or my Instagram, my Amazon pages, all of the book retailers. I've got BookBub, Goodreads, all of those things are there. You can click on and join. If you'd like, my newsletter sign up is on there. So if you haven't, so my second book, which is A Flicker of Light, this one.
Hmm.
Um, so if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get the first chapter of this book um, to as a sneak peek to
Yeah.
preview to check that out. So that's another thing you can do on there at katiepowner.com. So
Okay. Awesome. Well, we just appreciate you so much for being here and thank you for sharing your story and for writing all these wonderful stories. And I know we're gonna start picking up some more of your stories and just keep reading through all of them.
well, I really appreciate it, and I'm so thankful for your support.
Yeah.